Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Susie Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.susiecarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. So today I've got great pleasure in being joined by Mr. Ian Walmsley, the Planning Geek himself. And Ian, I always feel like I'm insulting you when I say that, but it's your branding, isn't it? It's your title. So please give us a quick intro into yourself.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, to be honest. It is a bit of a branding exercise, and you get tagged with various things in life, and you get sort of various labels. Hopefully, most are nice, and you try and ignore those that aren't, or whatever. But yes, I mean, Planning Geek is a brand. I originally started it back in 2017, so pre-COVID days, and quite often I liken it to a mad scientist, sort of down the bottom of the garden, making creations. That sort of guy that sort of tinkers away, and every so often he comes up with something decent. And to me, Planning Geek is precisely that. It began as one page, it then escalated quite rapidly to over 500 pages of free information as it is now, and is used widely. I mean, we have over 100,000 unique visitors a month visit the website, and they are all local, or most local authorities, as far as I know, use the site because they tell us. And so it is very popular and is the go-to resource for an awful lot of people. But I was sort of badgered for quite some time. Do you do planning applications? No. I kept on saying no. And then I sort of bowed to the inevitable pressure a couple of years ago, realigned my thinking, my focus. Various things happened, various projects that I was involved in didn't quite go to plan, and I'll always hold my hand up to those. But life moves on, and for me, that was sort of going full time into Planning Geek. We've just completed our second year of sort of full trading, if you like, and we're now doing very, very well with planning. We're doing an awful lot of planning applications. I counted up the clients that we dealt with last year, so that was in 2024. And that was over 800 clients that we dealt with, sort of paid clients, not just sort of answering questions on the Facebook group, whatever. It'd be an awful lot more than that. But so we're actually doing some decent stuff, and we are growing. It's with around about 18 consultants now. It's definitely a thing that's sort of going in the right direction, and long may that continue.
Fantastic. And if you haven't checked out Ian's Planning Geek website, I'd highly recommend it. I direct all my clients to that because it's just a really easy way of looking at all the different permitted development rights and all the different kind of planning rules and regulations. And you do it in such a really simple way, which is, which so often it isn't, is it, Ian?
You have to bear in mind that everything is based around legislation. And that can be very wordy, can be very confusing for people, and that's people get very confused. And believe me, so are the local authorities. There was after the 2015 General Permitted Development Order came out, or around that time, there was a survey amongst local planning officers, and the vast majority said, we do not understand certain parts of the GBDO. We don't understand it. One of which was demolition. And it took me 3 days to write effectively one page because it is so confusing. And the same happened with, a bit more on the commercial side of it under, Class Q, for example, and Class R. for agriculture, I had to rewrite that because a lot of local authorities were misinterpreting the rules and stuff like that. And so I had to rewrite this. And the same with new barns. It's a if you don't get it right, they get confused. They refuse things or don't do it correctly, which is I'm not criticising them whatsoever, and I really don't criticise local authorities very much. But everyone has to do it correctly, and so I try and write it in plain English for whether you are, somebody starting out in property, coming onto one of your commercial courses or whatever, haven't really got a Scooby-Doo as to what they're doing and want it in plain English. And that's what I try and do. I try and write it in plain English, but I have to understand it first before I can put it into plain English. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
exactly. And that's definitely not an easy task with planning law, is it? So, definitely check out the Planning Geek. So today, obviously, Commercial Property Podcast, we're here to talk about commercial property, and I thought we'd maybe concentrate on the permitted development rights for commercial property because I think a lot is talked about in terms of commercial to resi, but there's lots and lots of permitted development, isn't there, for pure commercial, like extensions and various other things. Can you give us a few of those?
Well, the simple fact is, people look at they'll know that we can stick on an extension to our house, we can put a dormer on our house, we can do this, we can do that, but believe it or not, a lot of people do not realise that commercial properties have PD rights as well. It's an overlooked thing. And yes, whilst it's never going to be the majority of clients or people browsing the website, it is still an important factor. And even now, for example, Part 7 is purely for non-domestic extensions, alterations, and stuff like this to commercial. Even now, that section has very little on the internet regarding it. And I know when I wrote it, it was practically the first thing that existed. So, of course, then it goes to the top of Google, which I'll never complain about. But even if we start right the way back at the basics, Part 2 of the GPDO, and by the way, folks, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, how do I find out where the GPDO is on Ian's site? If you just go to gpdo.uk or co.uk, you will go straight there. So it's a little short URL that saves you having to go through navigation. But it's minor operation. So things like gates, fences, access to highways, exterior painting, stuff like that, car charging points and stuff like that. They all relate to every type of property or whatever, whether that be residential or commercial or fields or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. But the point is that just because you've got a commercial property does not mean that you have to have planning for recharging or CCTV or access onto the road. You don't have to gain permission for in effect a driveway on a commercial property. So there's lots of things there, or putting up a fence, lots of little basic things which you might want to do. And you think, do I need planning? Well, as long as you tick those boxes, no, you don't. It's permitted development. But I mean, I suppose one of the sections that you alluded to earlier was the Part 7 of the GPDO. So I think one of the more important parts of that is extensions to commercial properties. But it's important to understand as to what classification those PD rights apply to. So we need to almost wind the clock back a little bit, and you need to work out as to whether your property comes under use class E for business, service, what have you. So things like shops, restaurants, cafes, bits like that, or whether you are looking at a storage and distribution, which would be B8, or whether you're looking at a general industrial unit, which will be B2. Whatever you're looking at, you just need to understand as to the use class of that building. So it's very important before you start thinking, I can build an extension, whatever, check to make sure that you're building qualifies under the use class. So that's the important fact you need to make sure you've got right first. So Class A, for example, of Part 7 allows for commercial extensions. Now, as a general rule, well, actually, no, before we say what general rules are, you need to make sure whether or not you've got any residential either above the, say, the shop or property you're looking at, or to the sides, or to the rear. In other words, does a residential property share the boundary with your commercial property? Because if it does, it's going to limit what you can do to a degree. If you've just got commercial around you, then great, you can take the full advantage of Part 7. So what can you actually do under Class A of Part 7? So what can you actually do within it? So you can extend on the ground floor up to 50% of the size of your commercial property, which can be quite big, or 100 square meters. So you are limited, and it's whichever's the lesser amount there. So, obviously, if you've got a 300 square meter property, you're going to be able to extend up to 100 square meters because obviously that is the lesser amount. The other important thing to check is as to whether you're in the designated land area. So if you're in a conservation area, AONB, or as it's now called National Landscapes, that's also been rebranded. I have no idea why. Before people write in and say, why isn't AONB now National Landscapes? I have no idea. It's a rebranding. It's a bit like, they all do it. All these government bodies like to do it. Or in the SSSI, Site of Special Scientific Interest, you're going to be limited to a 25% or 50 square meters. So importantly, even if you're in a conservation area, it does not stop you from expanding your property. All right. So you've got, I mentioned earlier about residential. If there are residential, you've got to make sure you are 2 meters away from that boundary if you're sharing it with residential. But importantly, you've got to make sure what is above. So if they've used Class G, perhaps to convert the upstairs or shops, offices, or whatever to residential, it's going to limit you to a degree. But on the whole, yeah, it's an extension which, to be honest, not an awful lot of people know about. And everyone listening to the podcast now will know, but you're still in a big minority, if you can have a big minority. You know what I mean? Or
I know what
small
you mean.
minority, whatever it is. But it is. It's just, people don't understand it. And what I will say then, because there will, although we are talking about commercial, some people think, I can extend it, and then perhaps I can then convert to residential. So it's worth mentioning the fact that, importantly, if you're thinking about doing that, just be careful, because one thing that Class MA says is the fact it must have existed for 2 years. Therefore, in my viewpoint, if you extend it, you can't then immediately convert it. You're going to have to wait a 2-year period. So I know we're not talking about residential, but I thought it's worth a mention, because just in case someone thinks, I've got an opportunity here. I've got my commercial building. I can extend it and then I can make bigger flats. Well, you can, but you just have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm going to go back and just say what I said a second ago. And importantly, quite often with PD, people think, I'm in a conservation area, therefore I don't have PD rights. I'm in a listed building, I don't have PD rights. I'm in an AONB, I don't have PD rights. It's all, to a degree, nonsense, because you still have PD rights. You may have limited ones, but PD rights still exist. So don't just dismiss it and think, I can't take advantage.
Yeah, really valuable. And I think you're absolutely bang on about that, in that knowledge is definitely power with that. And because so few people know this as a strategy, there's a potential there for this to be a lovely niche strategy, to be able to go off and add a significant amount onto floor areas. So that's a good one. And you mentioned Class MA there. So Class MA was brought in after COVID to convert commercial to residential. Could you give us because they changed, the government then subsequently changed it a bit, didn't they? Could you give us a quick overview of that and also Class G? Because even if people ultimately want to keep commercial as commercial, it's always great to have multiple exits. So, this could be potentially something you do now, but it could also be something where you do it in 2 to 5 years' time, something like that. It keeps your options open, doesn't it?
And I think importantly that if you're involved in property or buying commercial, you need to have more than one exit route.
Exactly.
If something goes wrong, if something goes pear-shaped, perhaps something becomes untenable because the market changes, you need to have another exit route, and to know those other exit routes is very, very important. So briefly, so Class G, first off, is up to 2 flats above use Class E. Okay, so if you've got your shop, restaurant, or whatever, as long as upstairs is linked to downstairs as part of the same unit, then you can create up to 2 flats above that. And it's although you now need prior approval, which is a 56-day application, it's very basic. It's probably one of the most basic PD rights that exist, apart from painting the outside of your building. It's very, very simple. There's not an awful lot to tick box there. So that's all fine. So that's 2 flats above. Class MA is effectively for conversion of any use Class E, for example, to residential. Now, whether that be restaurants, shops, offices, whatever, I mean, it could be a tower block because they've removed the maximum square meterage. It used to be 1,500 square meters. That's now gone. You also do no longer require vacant possession or vacancy for 3 months. That used to be a bit of a pain in the backside. That's now gone as well. So you're no longer limited to a maximum. So it's a bit like, for those who've been around a while, you used to have Class O rights from office to residential, and it's very similar to that. It's the modern equivalent to that, but covers an awful lot of other options bar this. Now, it's worth mentioning, of course, everything we're talking about today is English planning rules, so that's important to understand. Scotland has their own system up there. Wales has they've basically split away for us in 2015. So some of the bits will be the same, especially more on commercial side of things, but they did not adopt some of the things like Class MA and stuff like that. So we're talking about English properties here, but yeah, Class MA is not limited. And you can create as many dwellings as you like, providing that you stick to some basics. So at least 37 square meters for a 1-bed, 1-person dwelling, and you must have natural light, all habitable rooms. So as long as you've got those, and you can tick the other boxes within Class MA, yes, you can convert, but it has to be listed for 2 years, and you can't skip out that part. So if you've got a brand new building, it must be occupied and cemented as a commercial use first for 2 years before you can then convert it to a residential. But yeah, it's always good to have that other exit.
Absolutely. Great to have these things up your sleeve. And what about if you want to convert to an HMO off the back end of Class G or Class MA?
Right. So this is where it gets... So Class MA, you can't do it. So it specifically says you cannot do it. Now, Class G is a little bit more of a questionable situation. Now, I am of the mind that Class G allows for HMOs. Now, not everyone would agree with me, and that's fine. Not everyone has to agree with me. But I back this up by 2 or 3 bits of case law, and I'm not going to sort of bore everyone with, the relevant bits of case law. You can find them on my site if you need to. But effectively, one piece of case law says that, say you've got 2 flats above a use Class E, each of those units are separate planning units. So it says that they are separate. So that gives some weight there. Now, Class G does not expressively block Class L rights, which is your C3 to C4. Class MA does. So first off, Class G doesn't say that you can't do it. And then, importantly, in my viewpoint, Class G does not prevent Class MA from happening. I do not think, therefore, it should block Class G. There's nothing to say you can't do it. Yet people have made up their mind saying you cannot do it because there is a wording within Class G that it must only be kept as a family dwelling, etc., etc. That's not a problem. But it doesn't say you can't use other legislation or indeed other planning to go away from that. And that's my argument. Now, I will say that I have looked up, I have access to every single appeal case that's happened in the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. I cannot find a single Class G to argue that. I can't find any appeals that go against that application. And so, I would expect to find things if councils had enforced and appealed against something. I'd expect to find it, and I can't. So, that's my basis. And I know it's happened in certain parts with certain consultants. I know it's happened. But yes, it's one of those things that I think should happen and can. So, my viewpoint on that.
That's why I love talking to you, Ian, because I always get a vivid insider track on things, which is brilliant. So.
Look, at the end of the day, my viewpoint is the fact that if you want to do something, you've got to find reasons why you can't. Whenever I'm doing a Zoom session with clients and they want to do whatever they want to do, my role, as far as I'm concerned, in those Zoom meetings is to find reasons why they can't. I'm not interested in how it looks or anything else. I just want to find reasons that can't happen. And so it's the same with legislation, what blocks it?
Yeah.
And that's all I'm interested in, really, to be honest.
Yeah. So on a similar vein, so some clients of mine have done a really lovely strategy where they've done a conversion from commercial to, so it's basically ground floor commercial with some uppers, so all classified as commercial, in an Article 4 area to HMO, to an 8-bed HMO. And yes, they had to go for planning, but because you're not losing residential as a result of the planning to the HMO, as in dwellings, rather than anything else, then they've been successful. Is that something that you've kind of seen replicated elsewhere?
Yes, because quite often it's a lot easier going from commercial and taking that to change the use, because there will be policy against perhaps family homes being lost. Yeah. So Birmingham, for example, when converting to an HMO, there is policy against the loss of 3-bed family homes. Now, importantly, that is the original structure of the property. So if you put an extension on or split a bedroom, you can't get round that 3-bedroom rule by sort of taking a master and splitting it into 2. So I've got 4 now. So I don't, it's whatever the building was originally. So there's a policy against loss of 3-bed homes. Now, there isn't a policy against the loss of a pub or possibly is a pub, but what I'm saying is commercial building. There are other constraints as to loss of amenity, perhaps, if you've got a church or whatever, can that be used for other purposes, stuff like that, But general rule, they're not looking at the same policy constraints as the loss of a home. And most practically all local authorities are under pressure to provide housing. And we could argue the fact that, well, that's all right, a family, and we're now putting 6 people into this. Well, that's true, but it's often those family homes which have been, the lack of them over years, and they're the ones that are in the greatest demand. So that's why they try and protect them. But as long as you meet other rules and you can meet sandwiching and density of anything, you should be A-okay.
Yeah.
But, no guarantees in life, of course,
Nice little niche, that one. I like that one as a little niche, because obviously it does get around some of those articles.
We just got planning for it was a It was a former nightclub, been shut down, and ironically had planning that expired for an HMO in the past, but that's no guarantee. Just because something had planning or next door had planning, there's no precedents don't really happen because they look upon that individual building and policy changes, etc. But for them, yes, we were able to get planning. I think that went to an 8 or 10 bed HMO from a commercial building which wasn't viable for its current use.
Mm.
You know, and if a business has been shut down for a period of time, or it's been struggling, you know, you can use that argument. So, what I will say about commercial is, if you're ever looking at a commercial building and you're not intending to necessarily use it for that purpose, or you want to change, let's say you want to, change it from. I've got one at the moment. We've got one. We've got an old pub that's actually sort of, it had planning before to go to a restaurant, and now they're looking as a courier company to use it as a B8 storage and distribution. So purely commercial, nothing residential involved at all. But there will be a question about the loss of an amenity. So especially if it was still a pub, can there be, is that something that the local community, now believe it or not, with pubs, a lot of shutting down because there's no demand. The problem with pubs is that every Tom, Dick, and Harry will suddenly come out of the woodwork and say, "It's my local. I want to go and drink there. You can't close it down." And the truth is, they've probably never been in there last 10 years. They probably wouldn't even know what was being sold there. So it's very important. What I'm trying to say here, it's very important to know the marketing history of a commercial building. So always, whenever you're going to look at a commercial building, ask the agent, what is the history of that building? How long's it been on the market for? Because you may well need to do a viability report to say to the planners the fact that there's no demand for this commercial use. Whether you're going to residential or keeping it as another use under commercial, the planners will want to know there's no demand. So if you've got a church, for example, that's shut down, or that can, it's not viable there, is there demand, say, from youth groups or brownies guides or whatever? Has there been any demand? Has there been any request to use it or buy it from those organisations? So it's very important to know that marketing, know how long it's been on the market. Just because something, another client showed me another pub, actually, but it could apply to any commercial building, showed me a building that's been, I looked initially on my software. I have part of that, I have the sort of back end to right move. And, initially I said, oh, yes, it's been on the market 2 months. And he said, oh, no, it's been on with another agent before that. So it's very important to understand that marketing history and find out who that agent was, find out how long they're put on the market for, and make inquiries. Has anybody asked about buying it from that can use the current use class? Because that's all valuable information that you're going to need for planning, because it's not all about PD. I know we started on PD and we've gone a little bit off tangent, but that's life, right? That's me talking about planning because I enjoy and passionate about what I do. But if you go on a planning application, and never rule out going for planning applications, never, because often they can be a better solution at the end of the day. But you may need a viability report and other reports to back it up. So know your facts right at the start, because if it's not going to work, you're going to save you an awful lot of time by just sort of putting it to one side, moving on to something else. But perhaps that's what you've put to one side. Keep an eye on it, because perhaps in 6 months' time, when it is viable, it's still for sale, and you can come back. Let's have a look at it again. So
yeah, no, great advice. Whenever I've done any commercial planning, we've always had to do a viability assessment. Always. I mean, I can't think of a time when we haven't actually. So that's fantastic advice. And as you say, motivation increases with time. So sometimes it's quite handy to take over a property after maybe a year or 2 years of marketing, because everybody concerned is much more motivated than they might have been previously.
Very much so. And always tell agents about bad things. Don't ever tell folks, please, if you're going to take one thing away from this podcast, do not tell an agent your plans. Please don't tell them. Keep stum, all right? There's two people you do not discuss your plans with. One is agents, and the other one is a local authority. Never. They're not your friends. I love them dearly. I really do. There's a lot of criticism of local authorities, but we work closely with them. And if I told you now that I've had meetings with, often I'm in Zoom meetings with local authority planning officers because we're working with several of them on a new system that will come to fruition in coming years. But one local authority in Kent told me that over 60% of their applications are invalid. That's an awful lot of time wasted. And people say, well, my application's not been dealt with. Well, just make them valid in the first place. But I know it's not what we're talking about, but it's just one of my bugbears. And this is what getting all your reports and all your stuff together before you go and submit.
Yeah,
And
I mean, one of the
person.
I totally agree. I mean, one of the lessons I've learned over the years is don't do shortcuts. Whenever I've tried to, and I don't do it anymore. But in the past I've tried to shortcut things, there's always something where you come a cropper. Whereas if you have the right consultants with the right reports, then hopefully everything is just so much easier.
Right people at the right price at the right time.
Exactly.
You'll save money. There's no free go now with local authorities. So, and a lot of those fees are going to double in April. So depending upon when you listen to this podcast, they've either already gone up, and so tough. I'm sorry about that. You should have been listening in February or March.
This is 2025, in case anybody's listening in any other year.
But the point is that, for example, Class MA is going up from £125 to £250 per dwelling on the 1st of April. So again, but you don't get that second time. You don't get a free go. So getting that, using the right consultants, you say, is so important. I mean, we just had one not so long ago that they came to me and said, well, my Class MA application has been refused. I told them within about 30 seconds, well, yes, it should have been, because your consultant, who was an architectural person, hadn't put a window in a bedroom. It was an internal bedroom. There's no natural light. There's no window. Going to fail. And so you using the right people to do it is going to save you money. It might cost you a bit more, but often it doesn't save you in the long run.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've learned, certainly over the recent past, Ian, with all the introduction of these PD rights, is sometimes speed of implementation is key as well, isn't it? Because as you say, some of these fees are going up. Sometimes rules start to tighten. There becomes a bit of case law or a bit of a track record, and suddenly things that might have been possible at the beginning maybe aren't so possible. Is that something that you've seen? Kind of that speed of implementation is key?
Most of the times we're aware of it. Now, I like to think that I'm the first person to know about changes, especially the PD. So I actually have a watch 24/7, 365, and I get informed via watching the right parts of government, knowing when things are going to change. And quite often I've got that information on the site even before anyone else has. And quite a lot of people say, how do you know about that? Well, it's there, but you have to know where to look. But yeah, it's very important to understand when things do change, to actually get that timing right, and not to be, don't mess around. Timing may well be important, but equally your agent ought to know about these things. If your agent does not know about things and doesn't warn you about things or tell you about the risks involved with whatever you're planning, question your agent as to whether that's the right person, because quite often they'll come to us after the fact and say things doesn't work like that Class MA application, for example. But I quite often say, well, I'm sorry, but your agent, your planning consultant, your architect, whoever it might be, should have mentioned this to you in the first place, because we knew about this change coming. It's not, it's not hidden. It's their public knowledge, but it's very important to take advantage. Equally so, it can work the other way. There are times when you don't want to submit too early. Sometimes you're aware of a change that you want to take advantage of, and so you delay it quite deliberately. So, well, actually, we could submit it now, but it's not going to be to our best advantage because this is happening in a month's time, 2 weeks' time, whenever. So we're going to actually sort of just put the brakes on it, and we're going to hold it. Or there may be we may need to do some form of planning application or some other intermediary change of use to make that whole process quicker. So sometimes we will do a two-stage process. So we'll put an application in for something which makes the overall thing a lot easier, because if we jump straight from A to C, it may fail. So sometimes we have to go to A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And it's understanding that process and getting that right. So at the end of the day, we want to get whatever that client desires, as long as they listen to our advice or the advice of their agent.
So it's starting with the end in mind, basically, and working back with your strategy.
We want to get to whatever they want to seek, even if we don't think it's, some of the times we think, is it the best thing? Well, if that's what the client wants, but we try and educate at the end of the day. So if we can do that.
Yeah, great. Okay, some great advice there. So Class C obviously came in post-COVID as well. So I'm definitely old enough to, and I think you definitely are, and I definitely am as well. But plenty of people listening to this will be too old enough to remember that when we used to wanted to change a shop to a restaurant, we had to go for planning and. Class C obviously has just made it easier to repurpose.
Yeah, and it was rushed in because it was during 2020 it was brought in, so very much during sort of COVID times, and I think it was rushed in by Boris. He obviously wasn't abseiling down a wire at the time or doing whatever but he did rush it in somewhat, and that is to our advantage because it includes things like a GP surgery, bits like this that. It's not perfect, but there's an awful lot to take advantage of. So yeah, understanding what is included in Class E. Now, one thing I advise a lot of my mentees and those people I work with and try and educate, whether I'm talking at events or whatever, is walk down your high street. So if you want to do, if you're listening to this, an exercise that you can do is just go down and instead of looking at the ground, seeing what you might tread in, have a look at all the buildings either side as you walk down your shopping area, whether it's high street or whatever, and look at them and work out, is that use class E? Is that M? Is that it? What is it? What is the use class of all these various things? And what can I do with it? And look up as well. Because quite often on a commercial property, you might be able to go up. So you might, if you see very much a sort of like a top of a castle. So we're well aware of what top of a castle bits might look like. Quite often that's the same in the high street, and you get lower buildings that perhaps have been there an older time or they're new or whatever they might be. Can you build on top and even that out? So you're not pushing the skylight, the sort of the height so much, but look up. But if you can tell what the use class is of various things, you're an awful lot better off than most people, because then when opportunities come across you, you can think, oh, can I use PD right on this thing? Because I now know that is used Class E. Because sometimes, believe it or not, agents get this information wrong. Or it'll be under residential, it'll be listed under residential, but it's commercial. Why they put an office as a 3-bed dwelling? It happens, unfortunately.
Yes, it does happen.
So,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the interesting about Class E as well is obviously it was brought in to keep high streets going, to repurpose high street units, but of course you can use it out of town. So one of the uses in Class E is the old B1C, which is industrial.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of industrial developers now who are kind of subdividing industrial B1C Class E space into small units and putting high street type shops in there. I mean, really smart strategy that. I really like it.
Yeah, you can divide a commercial. You can't divide residential into two, but you can divide commercial. And I know that a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago now, but probably even pre-COVID. But I had another planning consultant said, "No, you can't, Ian. You're wrong." I said, "I'm right," but there we go. And he went away, got a barrister's opinion, came back. Oh yes, you are correct, aren't you? But yeah, you can divide a commercial. Excuse me, sorry. So you can divide a commercial. Importantly, though, you need to be careful that you're not altering the shop front. Because one thing you cannot do is alter the frontage quite often of buildings under PD. You can make alterations. Importantly, Class A, we mentioned earlier about Class A, about having extensions. Well, the other thing about Class A is it allows other alterations. So, for example, on the ground floor, you can add windows and doors. Not a lot of people know that, but you can, as long as you're not in the conservation area. Can't make external alterations in the conservation area. You can extend, but not make other alterations. But you can add those windows. So perhaps if your ultimate game is in a few years' time to convert to residential, which needs natural light capital rooms, can you now, with the intention of you using that for commercial, can you add those windows under Class A PD without having to go through another application?
Yeah, nice. And of course, there's it's a really well-worn path in commercial, subdividing units into more than 2 or 3 sometimes. But and often there's much more demand for the smaller units than there is for the larger units. So obviously, you're looking at kind of increasing the rents, the capital values, improving the yield. So it's planning is your friend with regard to that, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. So there's so much more I could ask you. When Ian and I get going on planning, like we literally could talk. I could talk to Ian for hours. I mean, we haven't even talked about agricultural, but I think you know what, we'll get you back and we'll talk about.
I'm always happy to come back. Look, at the end of the day, everything I've spoken about is on the Planning Geek website. Absolutely everything. There's nothing I don't think I've mentioned today which isn't on there. So go and find out, go and do your own due diligence, because it's not all going to be handed to you folks on a plate. You need to do a little bit of effort, even though I do try and make it easier for you and for the planning officers and everyone else. It's there for you to use free of charge. But go and look it up, planninggeek.co.uk. It's a free resource, and obviously if I can help you further, that's great. But if you go elsewhere, that's also great. I'm not it's a free world. It's a free world to go wherever you like. And if I, believe it or not, I have Zoom calls with other professionals, and so I'll often have architects and people come to me for advice, saying, "Oh, I need to understand what I'm doing because I've got a client." Fine, they're paying me for my time. So it's always it's a win-win in life. So there we go.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming along,
My
Ian.
pleasure.
And I definitely endorse that. It's definitely my go-to website of choice. And Ian's absolutely bang on. He is always first out of the marks with the, I don't know whether you pull an all-nighter or what you do, but you're always first off the mark.
I mean, it was true. I mean, actually, just the last thing to finish on, the 30th of April, now, 1st of May happens to be my birthday, but 30th of April,
happy birthday for then.
The government released it at, I think it was about 4 p.m. It was laid before Parliament. So the legislation was laid before Parliament. They'll say yay or nay, or whatever they say. And it went up. and I had the initial thing within about half an hour of that happening. It was on the site. And then because I love people so much, I actually got up. I think I got up about 3 o'clock in the morning on my birthday, and actually got it all written up. And come sort of 7, 8 o'clock, the pages have all been updated because there was quite a bit released. It was all updated, so when people came in that following morning, I was able to send out various things on social media, and that's when people start saying, "How do you know about it? Why is it already on this site?" It's because I love what I do. I love what I do, and I love giving information away to people. So, I'm not perfect. I'll have my hands up to that. I made a shed load of mistakes. But if I can just make life easier for one or two people listening to this, then I've done my job. So thank you once again for inviting me. And I wish everyone all the best with their developments, commercial or otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. That's dedication for you. And thank you so much for joining me. And we'll definitely get you back to talk about, there's so much more we could talk about. We'll definitely get you back again. So thank you so much.
Thank you.